They always been making trouble, haven't they? The voice came near his shoulder and sounded anxious. We can do without 'em. We'll be happier now, won't we? Ralph sat. The twins came, dragging a great log and grinning in their triumph. They dumped the log among the embers so that sparks flew. We can do all right on our own, can't we? For a long time, while the log dried, caught fire, and turned red hot, Ralph sat in the sand and said nothing. He did not see Piggy go to the twins and whisper to them, nor how the three boys went together into the forest. Here you are! He came to himself with a jolt. Piggy and the other two were by him. They were laden with fruit. I thought perhaps, said Piggy, we ought to have a feast, kind of. The three boys sat down. They had a great mass of fruit with them, and all of it properly ripe. They grinned at Ralph as he took some and began to eat. Thanks, he said. Then, with an accent of pleased surprise, thanks. Do all right on our own, said Piggy. It's them that haven't no common sense that make trouble on this island. We'll make a little hot fire. Ralph remembered what had been worrying him. Where's Simon? I don't know. You don't think he's climbing the mountain? Piggy broke into noisy laughter and took more fruit. He might be. He gulped his mouthful. He's cracked. Simon had passed through the area of fruit trees, but today the little uns had been too busy with the fire on the beach, and they had not pursued him there. He went on among the creepers until he reached the great mat that was woven by the open space and crawled inside. Beyond the screen of leaves the sunlight pelted down, and the butterflies danced in the middle of their unending dance. He knelt down, and the arrow of the sun fell on him. That other time the air had seemed to vibrate with heat, but now it threatened. Soon the sweat was running from his long, coarse hair. He shifted restlessly, but there was no avoiding the sun. Presently he was thirsty, and then very thirsty. He continued to sit. Far off along the beach, Jack was standing before a small group of boys. He was looking brilliantly happy. Hunting, he said. He sized them up. Each of them wore the remains of a black cap, and ages ago they had stood in two demure rows, and their voices had been the songs of angels. We'll hunt. I'm going to be chief. They nodded, and the crisis passed easily. And then, about the beast. They moved, looked at the forest. I say this. We aren't going to bother about the beast. He nodded at them. We're going to forget the beast. That's right. Yes, forget the beast. If Jack was astonished by their fervor, he did not show it. And another thing. We shan't dream so much down here. This is near the end of the island. They agreed passionately out of the depths of their tormented private lives. Now listen. We might go later to the Castle Rock, but now I'm going to get more of the big uns away from the conch and all that. We'll kill a pig and give a feast. He paused and went on more slowly. And about the beast. When we kill it, we'll leave some of the kill for it. Then it won't bother us, maybe. He stood up abruptly. We'll go into the forest now and hunt. He turned and trotted away, and after a moment they followed him obediently. They spread out nervously in the forest. Almost at once Jack found the dung and scattered roots that told of pig, and soon the track was fresh. Jack signaled the rest of the hunt to be quiet and went forward by himself. He was happy and wore the damp darkness of the forest like his old clothes. He crept down a slope to rocks and scattered trees by the sea. The pigs lay, bloated bags of fat, sensuously enjoying the shadows under the trees. There was no wind, and they were unsuspicious, and practice had made Jack silent as the shadows. He stole away again and instructed his hidden hunters. Presently they all began to inch forward, sweating in the silence and heat. Under the trees an ear flapped idly. A little apart from the rest, sunk in deep maternal bliss, lay the largest sow of the lot. She was black and pink, and the great bladder of her belly was fringed with a row of piglets that slept or burrowed and squeaked. So here you have Mama Pig, and feeding off of her are all these little piglets that are attached to her. And so the boys are creeping up, and obviously the idea is to kill the big pig so they can feast. 15 yards from the drove, Jack stopped, and his arm, straightening, pointed at the sow. He looked round in inquiry to make sure that everyone understood, and the other boys nodded at him. The row of right arms slid back, so they're poised to throw their spears now. Now! The drove of pigs started up, and at a range of only 10 yards, the wooden spears with fire-hardened points flew toward the chosen pig. One piglet with a demented shriek rushed into the sea, trailing Roger's spear behind it. The sow gave a gasping squeal and staggered up, with 2 spears sticking in her fat flank. The boy shouted and rushed forward. The piglets scattered, and the sow burst to the advancing line and went crashing away through the forest. After her! They raced along the pig track, but the forest was too dark and tangled so that Jack, cursing, stopped them and cast among the trees. Then he said nothing for a time but breathed fiercely, so that they were awed by him and looked at each other in uneasy admiration. Presently he stabbed down at the ground with his finger. There! Before the others could examine the drop of blood, Jack had swerved off, judging a trace, touching a bough that gave. So he followed mysteriously right and assured, and the hunters trod behind him. He stopped before a covert. In there! They surrounded the covert, but the sow got away with the sting of another spear in her flank. The trailing butts hindered her, and the sharp cross-cut points were a torment. She blundered into a tree, forcing a spear still deeper, and after that any of the hunters could follow her easily by the drops of vivid blood. The afternoon wore on, hazy and dreadful, with damp heat. The sow staggered her way ahead of them, bleeding and mad, and the hunters followed, wedded to her in lust, excited by the long chase and the dropped blood. They could see her now, nearly got up with her, but she spurted with her last strength and held ahead of them again. They were just behind her when she staggered into an open space where bright flowers grew and butterflies danced round each other, and the air was hot and still. So they're where Simon is hanging out. They're near him. Here, struck down by the heat, the sow fell, and the hunters hurled themselves at her. This dreadful eruption from an unknown world made her frantic. She squealed and bucked, and the air was full of sweat and noise and blood and terror. Roger ran round the heap, prodding with his spear whenever pig flesh appeared. Jack was on top of the sow, stabbing downward with his knife. Roger found a lodgment for his point and began to push till he was leaning with his whole weight. The spear moved forward inch by inch, and the terrified squealing became a high-pitched scream. Then Jack found the throat, and the hot blood spouted over his hands. The sow collapsed under them, and they were heavy and fulfilled upon her. The butterflies still danced, preoccupied in the center of the clearing. At last the immediacy of the kill subsided. The boys drew back, and Jack stood up, holding out his hands. Look! He giggled and flicked them while the boys laughed at his reeking palms. Then Jack grabbed Maurice and rubbed the stuff over his cheeks. Roger began to withdraw his spear, and boys noticed it for the first time. Robert stabilized the thing in a phrase that was received uproariously. Right up her ass! Did you hear? Did you hear what he said? Right up her ass! This time Robert and Maurice acted the 2 parts, and Maurice's acting of the pig's efforts to avoid the advancing spear was so funny that the boys cried with laughter. At length even this paled. Jack began to clean his bloody hands on the rock. Then he started work on the sow and paunched her, lugging out the hot bags of colored guts, pushing them into a pile on the rock, while the others watched him. He talked as he worked. We'll take the meat along the beach. I'll go back to the platform and invite them to a feast. That should give us time. Roger spoke. Chief. Huh? How can we make a fire? Jack squatted back and frowned at the pig. We'll raid them and take fire. There must be 4 of you. Henry and you, Robert and Maurice. We'll put on paint and sneak up. Roger can snatch a branch while I say what I want. The rest of you can get this back to where we were. We'll build the fire there. And after that... He paused and stood up, looking at the shadows under the trees. His voice was lower when he spoke again. But we'll leave part of the kill for... He knelt down again and was busy with his knife. The boys crowded round him. He spoke over his shoulder to Roger. Sharpen a stick at both ends. Presently he stood up, holding the dripping sow's head in his hands. "Where's that stick?" "Here. Ram one in the earth. Oh, it's rock. Jam it in that crack there." Jack held up the head and jammed the soft throat down on the pointed end of the stick, which pierced through into the mouth. He stood back, and the head hung there, a little blood dribbling down the stick. Instinctively the boys drew back too, and the forest was very still. They listened, and the loudest noise was the buzzing of flies over the spilled guts. Jack spoke in a whisper. "Pick up the pig." Maurice and Robert skewered the carcass, lifted the dead weight, and stood ready. In the silence and standing over the dry blood, they looked suddenly furtive. Jack spoke loudly. "This head is for the beast. It's a gift." The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest toward the open beach. So, to appease this beast, Jack has cut the pig's head clean off and put it on a stake in the earth there. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head still remained like an after-image. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business. So cynicism just means distrust, or it's a belief that people are only doing things to benefit themselves, that they don't actually care about anyone else. And a lot of people are very cynical about politicians. They think that politicians are only out to help themselves and not really to help the people who elected them. So this is the pig kind of communicating to Simon. And it's a little bit difficult to understand, but Simon's kind of a strange kid, and he is a little bit more sensitive than the others. And so he's kind of communicating with himself, really, but it's being portrayed as the pig communicating with him. So the pig assures Simon that everything was a bad business. "I know that." Simon discovered that he had spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head grinning amusedly in the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast. Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. "Run away," said the head silently. "Go back to the others." "It was a joke, really. Why should you bother? You were just wrong, that's all. A little headache, something you ate, perhaps. Go back, child," said the head silently. Simon looked up, feeling the weight of his wet hair, and gazed up at the sky. Up there, for once, were clouds, great bulging towers that sprouted away over the island, gray and cream and copper-colored. The clouds were sitting on the land. They squeezed, produced moment by moment this close, tormenting heat. Even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. So if these butterflies are kind of an innocence or a goodness, and now you have this evil pig's head kind of hanging out there, the butterflies don't want any part of that, so they leave. Simon lowered his head, carefully keeping his eyes shut, then sheltered them with his hand. There were no shadows under the trees, but everywhere a pearly stillness, so that what was real seemed elusive and without definition. The pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. After a while these flies found Simon. Gorged, they alighted by his runnels of sweat and drank. They tickled under his nostrils and played leapfrog on his thighs. They were black and iridescent green, and without number, and in front of Simon, the Lord of the Flies hung on his stick and grinned. And so now you know where the title of the book comes from. It's a reference to this pig's head, and this pig's head is symbolic of evil. At last Simon gave up and looked back, saw the white teeth and dim eyes, the blood, and his gaze was held by that ancient, inescapable recognition. In Simon's right temple, a pulse began to beat on the brain. So he's talking about this ancient, inescapable recognition. And to me that means, like, when you see evil, like pure evil, you recognize it instantly. Because it's an ancient thing. It's something that has existed as long as man has.